The slap landed before anyone in the room could draw a breath. Celeste, the girl everyone in Silverport society had grown up adoring, stood at the center of the living room with fresh tears shining in her eyes. Her voice had been trembling, perfectly pitched with just enough hurt to sound believable. "Did my sister break the necklace Mother gave me on purpose?" she had whispered to the room. "Is it because she truly cannot stand to look at me?" 1 second of silence. Then the sound of a palm striking a cheek cracked through the air like a whip. Lyra stood perfectly still. Her face had turned slightly to one side from the force of it, and a vivid red handprint was already blooming against her pale skin. She did not cry. She did not reach up to touch her cheek. She did not offer a single word of explanation. She simply raised her head, slowly and deliberately, and looked at the woman who was supposed to be her biological mother for the very first time, her eyes growing colder with every passing second. I stood at the doorway and watched it happen. Above Lyra's head, blood-red words floated in the air that only I could see. The real heiress versus the fake heiress storyline has officially begun. The real heiress is too proud, too unlikable, and refuses to cry, so she deserves every misunderstanding coming her way. The fake heiress is fragile, sweet, and knows precisely how to play the victim, so naturally everyone adores her. I stared at those words for a long moment. Then I slowly narrowed my eyes. Here we go again. 3 months ago, something in this world began to go profoundly wrong. Certain people would suddenly have these bizarre plot descriptions floating above their heads, as though an invisible narrator had decided their lives were a story and was kind enough to spoil the ending. The manipulative colleague at my previous firm had this written above her head: "She is simply starved for love and emotional safety." The cheating director who had stolen 2 years of someone else's work had this: "He just does not know how to express the conflict within himself." Garbage people. People who, in any reasonable world, belonged behind bars. And yet, according to those floating words, they all had perfectly understandable reasons. Meanwhile, every person in the vicinity who possessed actual principles, actual clarity, actual backbone, was quietly painted as the problem. Women got it the worst. The more silently a woman suffered, the more the world pitied her, as though pain endured without complaint was automatically noble. The more self-aware and rational a woman was, the more everyone around her bristled and called her difficult. Lyra was exactly the kind of person this warped storytelling logic loved to devour. She was the real heiress. According to the plot above her head, she was supposed to return to her wealthy biological family, the Wrens of Silverport, only to be framed repeatedly by the fake heiress, misunderstood endlessly by her own parents, humiliated by her brothers, scorned by her fiancé, and torn apart by an entire city's worth of online cruelty, until finally, after every single person who had wronged her was drowning in regret, she would forgive them all through exhausted tears and carry her scars quietly for the rest of her life. I had thought the whole thing was absurd. A fever dream. Until today. Until I personally watched that slap land on her face. I stopped holding back. I walked through the doorway and, without any hesitation whatsoever, kicked someone. The sound of Fletcher Wren, the second son of the Wren family, crashing over the glass coffee table was enormously satisfying. He went down in a cascade of shattered cups and overturned crystal, hitting the floor hard, and screams erupted throughout the room instantly. "Kale." Lyra turned and looked at me sharply. I did not spare a single glance at anyone else in the room. I walked straight toward her, looked down at the handprint still burning against her cheek, and felt something very close to losing control rise up inside me. "Who hit you?" I asked. The living room fell completely, deathly silent. Mrs. Wren's face had gone the color of old ash. "You, who are you, exactly?" I lifted my gaze to hers. "I am her boyfriend. And let me make one thing perfectly clear right now. Anyone who puts a hand on her again will regret it for the remainder of their life. I guarantee it." The Wren family had not been prepared for this. Because in their version of today, this was supposed to be a beautiful, dramatic family reunion. The real heiress returns home, nervous and humble and quietly overwhelmed. The fake heiress produces a few artfully placed tears, and the entire family rushes to comfort her. The mother weeps with guilt, the father frowns disapprovingly at the wrong person, and the brothers take turns explaining to the real heiress why she is being unreasonable. Eventually, swallowing her grief and humiliation, the real heiress backs down. That was how the story was supposed to go. Unfortunately for all of them, I had not come here to follow anyone's script. I had come to destroy it. Chapter 2. Fletcher climbed back up from the ruins of the coffee table, glass crunching beneath his shoes, his face dark with fury. You dare start a fight inside the Wren family home? I did, I said. My voice was calm, almost pleasant, but cold enough to make the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. When that slap landed just now, not one person in this room moved to stop it. But the second I kick you once, suddenly everyone finds their voice. So tell me, is that how this household works? You are all allowed to bully her, but nobody is permitted to stand up for her. You. I am not finished. I cut him off and turned to look at Mrs. Wren, seated on the sofa in her custom-made dress, her nails perfectly lacquered, every inch of her the picture of a refined, wealthy woman. The same elegant, well-maintained hand that had just struck her biological daughter across the face without a moment's hesitation. Above her head, words were already flashing. She is suffering too. She simply does not want her adopted daughter to feel displaced. I almost laughed from sheer, cold anger. She did not want the adopted daughter to feel displaced, so she displaced her biological daughter instead. What kind of logic was that? Mrs. Wren finally seemed to collect herself. She looked at Lyra with a carefully composed expression. Lyra, I was simply anxious in the moment. Anxious about what? I interrupted immediately. Anxious to defend the girl who has been living your daughter's life for the past 20 years. Beside Mrs. Wren, Celeste stiffened. Then, like clockwork, the tears began to fall. She was very good at that. Her chin trembled, her eyes went liquid, and her voice dropped to a wounded murmur. I never wanted Mother to hit my sister. I only panicked when I saw the necklace broken. I was not trying to cause any of this. There it was. The standard performance. Looking at her tear-streaked face, I genuinely wanted to award her a trophy and send her home. So you panicked, I said. And that gives you the right to level accusations without a single shred of evidence. You cried, so everyone was supposed to charge into battle on your behalf. Celeste bit her lip. She looked on the verge of fainting. That was when Conrad Wren, the eldest son and the self-appointed voice of reason in this family, finally stood up. That is enough, he said firmly. Lyra, since you have brought this man here, let us speak plainly. Celeste grew up in this family. She did not deliberately steal your identity, and she is not to blame for the circumstances of your birth. You have barely walked through the door and the entire house is already in chaos. Do you not think that says something about you? I looked at him for a moment. She is innocent, you said. So what is Lyra, then? She suffered outside this family for 20 years. The first time she comes home, your entire family surrounds her as though she is standing trial. Her mother slaps her. Her brother yells at her. You all circle the wagon around someone else while Lyra stands here being treated like an intruder. And now you are telling me Celeste is the innocent one. Fine. Let me ask you this. If the person standing here getting slapped today had been Celeste, would you still tell her not to make a scene? Conrad's face went an unpleasant shade of green. He did not answer. We both knew why. If Celeste had shed a single tear, this entire family would have spent the rest of the evening devastated. But when Lyra took that slap, their first instinct was to wonder whether she was being too aggressive. That was the most disgusting thing about this kind of favoritism. It was never about fairness. It was simply about who was loved more, and it dressed itself up as reason. I turned and took Lyra's hand, pulling her gently behind me. If this is what a family reunion looks like in this household, then consider it over. If you all want to keep performing your perfect domestic drama where everyone protects the adopted daughter, I will not stop you. But hear me carefully. I swept my gaze across every face in the room, letting the silence stretch out until it was uncomfortable. If I ever hear anyone insult her again, I will make certain they never dare open their mouth in her direction for the rest of their lives. No one said a word. Chapter 3. As Lyra and I reached the entrance of the Wren residence, Mr. Wren's voice cut through the air from behind us, stiff with suppressed authority. Stop right there. I paused. The actual head of the Wren family had finally decided to speak. Young man, this household is not a place for you to run wild in. I turned back to face him. What a coincidence, I said quietly. She is not someone your household gets to run wild over, either. Chairman Wren, since you are the one in charge here, allow me to offer you one piece of advice. How you choose to treat her today is exactly the kind of treatment she will return to you in the future. I promise you that. We left. For the entire drive afterward, Lyra said nothing. She sat beside me in the passenger seat, her posture perfectly upright, her hands folded in her lap. When we reached the Silverport riverside, she spoke at last. Pull over. I parked along the embankment. The night wind coming off the water was sharp and cold. She stepped out and walked to the railing, standing there without a word for a long time, looking out at the black river below the city lights. I did not rush her, and I did not try to fill the silence with comfort. There are moments when comfort is weightless, when the only words that feel real are the ones a person arrives at on their own. After a while, her voice came quietly into the dark. Cale. Yeah. Do you think people are just built this way? Do you think this is simply what they are? My chest tightened. She turned her head slightly. The wind lifted loose strands of hair across her forehead, and the red handprint on her cheek still had not faded. I genuinely never expected anything from them, she said. I told myself I had no expectations. But when the moment actually arrived, some small, stupid part of me still thought, maybe just this once, even just one person in that room would stand on my side. She paused. They did not even bother to investigate. They had already decided I was the problem before I finished a single sentence. Her voice was quiet and steady, and somehow that made it press harder against my chest than any amount of crying would have. I walked over and draped my jacket across her shoulders. Do you know what the truly maddening part of all this is? I said. It is not the favoritism itself. It is that while they favor someone else completely, they still expect you to be the understanding one. They want to protect Celeste and simultaneously demand maturity and forgiveness from their biological daughter. They want everything, and they intend to pay nothing for it. Lyra stayed quiet. I reached out and gently turned her face toward me. Does it hurt? Her eyelashes trembled. A little. I looked at the mark on her cheek, and whatever thin thread of restraint I had left pulled tighter. Then remember it, I said. Do not make excuses for them. Do not forgive them on their behalf. One day they will repay this slap tenfold, and you will not have to lift a finger to make it happen. She looked at me for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, a faint smile crossed her face. Cale, you seem even angrier than I am. Of course I am, I said. That slap landed on your face. It landed in my chest. Her eyes reddened immediately, not from grief, but from something that happens when a person realizes, sometimes for the very first time, that someone is standing entirely, unconditionally on their side. What if they never change? She asked softly. I looked directly at her. Then I will knock some sense into them until they are afraid to try any of this again. She froze for 2 full seconds. Then she actually laughed. But above her head, those floating words reappeared. The real heiress will compromise repeatedly because she is desperate for familial love. The male lead's protection is temporary. In the end, she must carry everything alone. I stared at those words, and slowly, deliberately, I clenched my fists. Carry everything alone? Absolutely not. As long as I was standing beside her, she would not endure a single thing by herself. That very night, I had people begin pulling apart every financial connection, every network of influence, every buried secret tied to the Wren family. If this ridiculous story insisted on using the real heiress trope as its weapon, I was going to break that weapon at the root. Chapter 4. The following day, the Wren family announced a formal banquet. On the surface, it was presented as a celebration to officially welcome Lyra home. In reality, any person with functioning eyes could see exactly what it was. A trap. Because nearly every wealthy family in Silverport had been invited, which meant the real heiress, the fake heiress, the biased parents, and the 2 overprotective sons were all going to be on display in front of an audience that had been waiting for this drama to unfold. If Lyra refused to attend, she would be painted as petty and unable to function in high society. If she attended, she would be walking straight into a public humiliation designed to leave her in pieces. Going? I asked her. Yes. She stood in front of the mirror in a black evening gown, her back perfectly straight. They want me to embarrass myself, don't they? Then let me go and see exactly who ends up embarrassed. I looked at her and smiled. Now that was more like it. The moment we stepped through the entrance of the venue, every gaze in the room swung toward us simultaneously. Some people were evaluating, some comparing, and some were not bothering to disguise their contempt at all. In their minds, Lyra was a girl raised outside the elite world, and Celeste was the real socialite they had watched grow up at dinners and galas and charity events for 2 decades. What none of them knew was that by the end of the evening, the Wren family's dignity would be in ruins on the floor. Less than 10 minutes after our arrival, the first move came. A woman in a sapphire gown touched her fingertips to her lips and smiled in that particular way that certain people have perfected, warm on the surface and vicious underneath. Susan, oh, I am sorry, Lyra, forgive me. I heard you grew up in quite an ordinary household. Well, there is so much to learn about how things are done in these circles. You really ought to watch how Celeste carries herself. Some things simply cannot be picked up after a certain age. Several people nearby made sounds of agreement. Celeste has always been so refined. She has such natural grace. These things really do need to start early, do they not? Every syllable was a small, polite knife. You do not belong here. You never will. Before Lyra could respond, I smiled pleasantly at the woman in the sapphire gown. You are absolutely right, madam. Some things simply cannot be learned later in life. She blinked, slightly thrown. What do you mean by that? I tilted my wine glass gently. Manners, for one. People with genuine manners do not use someone else's upbringing as dinner party gossip. Nor do they disguise insults as concern. At your age, having not yet mastered that particular lesson, I do think the window may have closed. The room went completely silent. Somewhere behind me, someone nearly choked trying to suppress laughter. The woman's face had turned a deep, splotchy red. You, how dare you? Please, continue, I said pleasantly. I am enjoying this very much. The atmosphere in the room shifted. People had clearly never seen someone at one of these events simply refuse to play the expected role. But the real climax was still coming. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Wren stood at the center of the room and produced an emerald necklace, holding it up for all to see. This necklace has always belonged to the daughters of the Wren family, she announced, her voice carrying the careful weight of a woman making a public statement. Tonight, I would like to present it to Lyra. The room went quiet in a different way this time, because everyone present knew the necklace had always been assumed to be Celeste's eventual inheritance. Mrs. Wren bringing it out now, giving it to Lyra publicly, was the family drawing a line in the sand. I glanced toward Celeste. Above her head, words began flashing wildly. The necklace will disappear. Everyone will assume the real heiress stole it. She will become a complete laughingstock. I smiled slowly. So they were pulling this particular trick. Chapter 5. Fewer than 30 minutes later, the necklace was gone. The first to raise the alarm was Celeste, her voice rising in that precisely calibrated pitch of distress she did so well. Mother, the necklace has disappeared. The banquet hall immediately sharpened to a point of attention. Mrs. Wren's composure cracked visibly. How could it possibly disappear? And Celeste, with exquisite timing, let her gaze drift hesitantly toward Lyra, her expression the picture of reluctant suspicion. She said nothing. She did not need to. Fletcher was already on his feet, pointing. She was the only one who touched it. His voice was sharp and furious, carrying easily across the room. Lyra, what is wrong with you? You walk through the door and you are already stealing from your own family. The room erupted in whispers. Surely not. Well, if she has never been around things like this before, perhaps the temptation, you never really know someone who was raised differently. No evidence. No investigation. Just the assumption, automatic and immediate, that because she had not grown up wealthy, she must have taken it. Because she was not crying or begging or making herself small, she must be guilty. Lyra's expression turned to ice. You are accusing me of theft. Show me your proof. Fletcher sneered. A girl who comes back from a background like yours. The crack of a slap cut him off mid-sentence. Not from me. From Lyra. The blow landed cleanly across Fletcher's face, snapping his head to one side, and the entire banquet hall went so still that the ambient music from the string quartet became suddenly, absurdly audible. Fletcher stood motionless, stunned into silence. So did everyone else in the room. Nobody had expected this. Every assumption they had made about the real heiress, that she would endure quietly, swallow her humiliation graciously, explain herself with barely suppressed tears, was shattered in a single moment. Lyra shook out her hand with complete composure. That was to remind you how to speak to another human being. If I hear you insult where I come from again, I will make certain you regret the day you learned to talk. Standing beside her, I came very close to applauding out loud. That was exactly right. Why should anyone endure it? When someone is already grinding their heel into your dignity, what exactly are you protecting by staying polite? Fletcher snapped out of his shock and his face went ugly with rage. He raised his hand to strike back. I caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted it backward in one clean motion. The sound of the joint giving way made half the room flinch. Fletcher screamed. I kept my voice perfectly level. Try that again and I will do the other one to match. Phineas shot to his feet. Kale. I ignored him entirely and simply snapped my fingers. The massive screen mounted at the far end of the banquet hall lit up. Security camera footage began to play, large and unavoidable and utterly clear. In the recording, Celeste glanced carefully over her shoulder, waited for the precise moment when everyone's attention was elsewhere, and smoothly slipped the necklace into the interior pocket of her evening bag. She then turned around and composed her face into that familiar expression of soft, wide-eyed innocence. The hall erupted. She planted the whole thing herself. Is she insane? That was deliberate. That was a setup. Celeste had gone white. The tears came immediately, flooding down her cheeks, her voice fracturing into something barely coherent. No, that is not what it looks like, I would never. You just did, I said. Your own actions are on film and you are still pretending. How long do you think crying has been a substitute for accountability? Do you truly believe the world is obligated to revolve around your tears? I let the silence sit for a moment. This was not a childish mistake, Celeste. This was deliberate framing. It has a name in law. It is called a crime. Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor. Mrs. Wren moved instinctively to help her, reaching out, and Lyra's voice stopped her cold. This time you are not slapping me. 4 words. They hit harder than anything I could have said. Mrs. Wren froze where she stood, the color draining from her face, because for the first time, she truly understood how grotesque that slap had been. The silence in the room was total. I surveyed every member of the Wren family assembled in that hall and let my voice carry. Listen carefully. From this point forward, if anyone attempts to damage her name or her reputation, I will not be speaking to you about family bonds or social grace. I will be speaking only about consequences. Every one of them. That night, the Wren family lost what remained of their dignity in that room. And it was only the beginning. If the necklace incident stripped away Celeste's carefully constructed mask of fragility and innocence, then the figure who appeared next existed for no purpose except to make reasonable people's teeth itch. His name was Soren Vale, the only son of the Vale family and Celeste's childhood companion. In the original soap opera version of this story, he was supposed to look down on Lyra for being, in his own words, unrefined, while expressing heartfelt sympathy for poor displaced Celeste, eventually delivering some grand, theatrical declaration that the position of Mrs. Vale belonged to no one but the woman he had always loved. In a certain kind of story written for a certain kind of reader, that line might have been considered romantic. In reality, it made me want to put him through a wall. The day I accompanied Lyra to the headquarters of Wren Group for the first time, he was already waiting in the lobby. He wore an expensive suit, carried himself with the practiced arrogance of someone who had never once been told no, and opened his mouth with the confidence of a man who believed his words were worth hearing. Lyra, he said, as though they were old acquaintances and this was a gentle warning between friends, I would suggest you consider your position here carefully. Celeste has suffered enough. There is no need to continue cornering her. And regarding the long-standing arrangement between the Wren and Vale families, it would be better for everyone if you did not entertain ambitions that were not meant for you. The position of Mrs. Vale is not simply available to anyone who happens to show up. The lobby went quiet. Several employees nearby found reasons to look everywhere except at us. Lyra looked at him for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said, with no particular emotion. "Who are you?" I nearly lost my composure entirely right there. That single question hit harder than any insult she could have delivered, because men like Soren Vale had one vulnerability above all others, the realization that they were not important enough to be remembered. Soren's face tightened. "Stop pretending. Celeste and I have known each other for 20 years. The bond between us is not something an outsider could possibly understand." I stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder with a degree of casual friendliness that I did not feel in the slightest. "My friend, which expired CEO romance novel did you step out of?" He frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, dropping the casual warmth entirely, "that if you speak another word like that in front of her, I will personally demonstrate that the legal system in this city has no patience for people like you and no shortage of ways to make your life very uncomfortable." Chapter 6. As I finished speaking, I applied pressure and sent Soren straight down onto his knees on the polished lobby floor. The sound he made brought every eye in the building to our corner of the room. I looked down at him, keeping my voice low enough that only the immediate vicinity could hear. "The position of Mrs. Vale is precious to you. Keep it. My girlfriend has no interest in it whatsoever." I leaned slightly closer. "And if you bring up that arrangement one more time, I will have your drunk driving records, your tax irregularities, and the details of at least 3 simultaneous relationships delivered to your father's office before the end of the business day. All of it documented. All of it airtight." The color left his face entirely. He looked up at me, and for the first time since we had encountered him, genuine fear replaced the arrogance in his eyes. Above his head, the floating text began to flicker and destabilize. "The devoted male supporting character arc has collapsed." Good. It deserved to collapse. Every ounce of that performed nobility, that manufactured devotion sustained only by the story's own machinery, deserved to be taken apart piece by piece. What followed was a series of escalations that made everything prior seem almost manageable by comparison. A major project that Lyra had spent 3 exhausting weeks developing at Wren Group had its documented credits quietly altered, her name removed and Celeste's inserted in its place. Then, almost simultaneously, a wave of anonymous social media accounts began circulating stories about Lyra, painting her as a schemer who had forced out the beloved adopted daughter, calling her manipulative and fabricating salacious details about her personal life. The story spread with that specific, vicious momentum that only targeted cruelty achieves. And then it reached her parents. Someone splashed red paint across the front door and exterior walls of the home where Lyra had been raised, the modest house in the quieter district of the city where her adoptive parents had lived for 30 years. Thick red letters covered the stonework, "You stole another family's daughter for 20 years." When I drove Lyra there that evening, her adoptive mother was standing at the doorway with a damp cloth still clutched in both hands, her eyes swollen from crying. "Lyra, I am fine, truly. Do not worry about me." Lyra stood on the path and stared at the wall. She was trembling. Not from fear, not from grief, but from a fury so deep and so compressed that it shook her whole frame. I understood the difference immediately. Everything the Wren family had thrown at her, every frame-up, every public accusation, every slap and dismissal, she had faced without breaking. She had endured it, fought back, and kept her head. But her parents, the 2 ordinary, decent people who had raised her with nothing but genuine love, were untouchable ground. The moment someone crossed into their lives, all calculations ended. I turned from the painted wall and started walking back toward the car. Lyra caught my arm immediately. "Cale. Where are you going?" "To make them pay for this." Her grip tightened. "Cale." I stopped and looked back at her. Her eyes were red, but her voice was absolutely steady. "This time," she said quietly, "I am coming with you." Something shifted in my chest. I looked at her for a moment and then smiled. Good. That night was the first time Lyra stopped being reactive and became something else entirely. We sat together and assembled every piece of evidence we had accumulated: Celeste's payments to anonymous social media operators, the original recording of the necklace theft, documentation of the altered project credits, Soren Vale's files, screenshots, and metadata trails proving the defamation campaign had been coordinated and deliberate. We organized everything in chronological sequence, cross-referenced and clearly labeled. At 1 in the morning, we released it all simultaneously across every major platform. At the same time, 17 separate legal notices went out to named individuals and organizations. By morning, the internet had caught fire. The real heiress fights back after months of coordinated slander. The fake heiress caught on camera framing her own sister. The Veil heirs' catalog of scandals exposed. The Wren family's systematic favoritism laid bare. The comment sections ran for miles. So the entire harassment campaign was manufactured by the adopted daughter's side this whole time. This is genuinely evil. She lived as someone else's identity for 20 years and then tried to destroy the real person when she came home. That footage of the mother slapping her own biological daughter made my vision go red. If I were in her position, I would have burned the whole thing down long before now. Her boyfriend is absolutely terrifying. Someone needs to cast him as a protagonist immediately. Chapter 7. The internet had become a storm, and both the Wren and Veil families were caught directly inside it. But what stayed with me most, watching Lyra scroll through the tide of comments on her phone that morning, was that she was not excited. She was not triumphant or flushed with the adrenaline of it. She simply let out a long, quiet breath and said, "Turns out presenting clear evidence really does work better than absorbing everything in silence." Remember that feeling, I told her. From now on, whenever someone makes your life harder than it needs to be, you push back. If reason works, use reason. If reason is not enough, use evidence. And if evidence still falls short, then you handle it, she finished, looking up at me. Then I handle it, I agreed. For the first time in weeks, actual light had returned to her eyes. And it was precisely then that I noticed the plot text above her head had begun to blur at the edges, as though whatever force was generating it had started to lose its grip on her. I should have known it would escalate further when it lost the ability to work subtly. When manipulation, rumors, and systematic framing stopped producing the desired result, the story's logic apparently decided to jump straight to something irreversible. Lyra went to meet a client that afternoon. Then she was gone. Her phone signal went cold, and the last location it registered before cutting out was an abandoned industrial complex at the edge of the city, in the low flat district near the old freight yards. The moment I received the call, everything in my head went completely, purely quiet in the way it only does when something is genuinely wrong. Not panic. Something much colder than panic. Above my own vision, familiar words appeared. Final stage of the real heiress versus fake heiress arc. The fake heiress has descended into complete desperation. The male lead arrives at the final moment to rescue the heroine. I stared at those words until they blurred. The final moment. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and covered the distance to the freight district in 20 minutes flat. When I kicked the warehouse door open, it swung back hard against the concrete wall, and everyone inside turned. Lyra was tied to a chair in the center of the floor, blood at the corner of her mouth, her face pale but her expression utterly unbroken. Celeste stood in front of her, a knife in her hand, her face a map of something that had long since stopped resembling the girl everyone had spent 20 years adoring. There was nothing left of the fragile, tearful creature from the banquet hall. Only something raw and desperate and cornered. "Why won't you just lose?" Celeste's voice had cracked into something jagged. "You already have everything. Why did you have to come back? Why did you have to take all of it? My mother. My father. My brothers. Soren. Every single thing in that family was mine. Why couldn't you have just stayed away?" Lyra looked up at her. Despite the blood, despite the ropes, despite all of it, she was completely calm. A faint, exhausted smile moved across her face. "You are wrong about something," she said quietly. "I did not steal a single thing from you. Every piece of it that you are so desperate to hold onto was never yours to begin with." That sentence went through Celeste like a blade. Something behind her eyes snapped. She raised the knife. I was already moving. The kick connected with her wrist and the knife went clattering across the concrete floor. 3 men with steel rods who had been standing in the shadows of the warehouse immediately surged forward. I did not dodge. I caught the first rod mid-swing, tore it free, and reversed it directly into the face of the man swinging it. The sound was not pleasant. The second man had barely committed to his rush before my knee found his stomach and he folded to the ground, retching. The third came from behind me, and I simply turned and put a chair through him. The entire thing was over in approximately 3 seconds. The warehouse floor was covered with people who would not be getting up quickly. Celeste had pressed herself against the far wall, her legs folded under her, staring at me with the first genuine, undisguised terror I had ever seen on her face. Kale. I turned away from her and went directly to Lyra, cutting the ropes from her wrists and wrapping my coat around her shoulders in one movement. Are you hurt? Her voice was slightly rough. I am fine. I looked at the blood on her mouth, and all the careful, controlled restraint I had maintained through months of this evaporated completely. Chapter 8. I turned back to where Celeste was sitting on the floor. You really wanted this to be the ending, I said. She shook her head frantically, tears pouring down her face now. I did not mean for it to go this far. I was just so terrified of losing everything. I did not know how to stop. Stop. I stepped forward, and she flinched back. You were afraid of losing things. So you framed an innocent person. You hired people to destroy her reputation. You paid operatives to vandalize her parents' home. You organized her kidnapping and held her here with a knife. And now you want to tell me about fear. I looked at her for a long moment. By your logic, I should be able to say that I am afraid people like you will keep hurting innocent people, and therefore burying you somewhere quiet would be a perfectly understandable response. Would that argument work for me? She had completely forgotten how to cry. She just stared at me. Outside the warehouse, police sirens cut through the night air, and the color of what little remained in Celeste's face drained away entirely. Because she understood now. There was no one left to save her. When the officers came through the door and secured the scene, I handed over the recording from the warehouse, the security camera footage, the phone location data, and the complete evidence chain we had been assembling for weeks. Kidnapping. Unlawful imprisonment. Assault. Defamation. Commercial sabotage. Enough charges stacked together that any lawyer reviewing the file would see them holding for a very long time. The day Celeste was formally taken into custody, every member of the Wren family appeared at the precinct. Mrs. Wren was the worst of them. Her makeup was ruined, her hair undone, and she looked as though something essential had been extracted from her body without warning. She cried in a way I had never seen from her before, not the controlled, aristocratic distress she had always shown in public, but something real and desperate and broken. Conrad and Fletcher both looked terrible. Fletcher in particular, the loudest and most aggressively protective of them all throughout everything, stood against the wall with red eyes and said nothing. Because the reality he had been refusing to see for weeks had finally arrived fully formed and unavoidable. The sister he had defended so ferociously, the fragile creature he had believed in completely, had been methodically dismantling another person's life the entire time. She was not innocent. She had never been innocent. Mrs. Wren pushed through the crowd and reached for Lyra's hands. Lyra. Your mother is begging you. Please. Speak to the police. Tell them she made a mistake. She is young. She cannot go to prison, she simply cannot. Lyra did not step back. She did not pull her hands away. She simply looked at the woman in front of her, and the expression on her face was worse than any rejection. You know what every one of these appeals tells me, she said, her voice quiet and utterly steady. Every time you plead for her, every single time you stand here and ask me to set aside what was done to me, you are communicating one thing very clearly. That I deserved all of it. A beat of silence. I deserved being framed. I deserved being misunderstood by every single person in your family. I deserved the slap you gave me. I deserved the months of cyberbullying. I deserved watching the parents who raised me have their home vandalized. Because she cried, she automatically became the victim. Because she grew up beside you, everything she did could be forgiven and forgotten. But what exactly did I do wrong? What was my offense in all of this? The entrance of the police station was absolutely still. Mrs. Wren stood with her mouth open, tears streaming, unable to produce a single word. Because she had no answer. Not one. That slap had shattered the last of the comfortable fictions she had been hiding behind, the ones that said she was simply a loving mother doing her best, that her pain was real and that meant her actions were forgivable. Lyra's voice grew quieter and colder at once. The reason I am standing here today is not because this family loved me. It is because I was strong enough not to be destroyed by any of you. So please stop speaking to me about forgiveness. You have not earned it. Fletcher broke first. His head dropped, and when he looked up his eyes were raw. I am sorry, he said roughly. Lyra, I was an idiot. I was completely blind. I am sorry. In a certain kind of story, this would be the moment when the wrong party softens. When the music rises and the wounds begin to close. Lyra looked at him with the same steadiness. What is your apology worth? Can it undo the slap I took? Can it give my parents back the morning they spent scrubbing red paint off their walls? Can it return any part of the life that came close to being completely destroyed? She paused. No. Then there is nothing more to say. Fletcher's face cycled through several shades. He finally lowered his head all the way and kept it there. I stood beside Lyra and said nothing. Because in that moment, she did not need me to say anything. She had arrived at this place herself, on her own terms, with her own voice. And that mattered infinitely more than anything I could have done on her behalf. The most meaningful victories are never the ones where someone avenges you. They are the ones where you finally understand, with every part of yourself, that when people owe you pain, you do not have to pretend it cost you nothing. Chapter 9. After everything had run its course, the Wren family issued a formal public statement of apology. The Vale family's reputation took a collapse from which it would not recover quickly. Celeste was formally charged and prosecuted. Wren Group, under pressure from public outcry and several institutional investors, restored to Lyra everything that had always rightfully belonged to her. Shares. Board standing. Properties. Project leadership. The whole of it. She accepted all of it without hesitation. There were people who found this hypocritical, who murmured behind her back that if she was truly principled she would not have taken a single cent from the family that had wronged her. When I heard this, I found it genuinely difficult not to laugh. What kind of reasoning was that? It was hers. It had always been hers. Only someone with a very specific brand of moral confusion would argue that a victim demonstrating self-respect by refusing what belonged to them somehow elevated their character. The most destructive lie ever told to people who have been wronged is that dignity requires poverty. That the truly principled thing is to walk away from everything owed to you so that the people who hurt you can keep it. Lyra was not foolish, and she was not performing nobility for an audience. She took what was hers because it was hers, and there was nothing complicated about that. As for the Wren family themselves, she never went back. Not once. They came to find her many times after. Mrs. Wren arrived in tears. Conrad came with his head bowed. Fletcher stayed silent in the doorway, not knowing what to say. Mr. Wren sent legal representatives with offers of further compensation. Each time, Lyra gave them the same response: handle all matters through the appropriate legal channels. I watched this and understood what it meant. It was not bitterness keeping its teeth in. It was genuine release. She had stopped caring. Not in the numb, deadened way of someone still bleeding, but in the clean, final way of someone who had decided these people did not have access to her anymore. And once someone truly stops caring, once they close the door not in anger but simply because they no longer see any reason to open it, there is nothing left that can hurt them. 3 months after the last of it, we moved into a new apartment on the western side of the city. It was not large, but it was full of light. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the rooftops, and Lyra had filled the balcony with potted plants she had been collecting from the weekend market since we signed the lease. One evening I came home to find the front door unlocked and the apartment quiet. I pushed it open and saw her through the glass balcony doors, crouched among the flower pots in an old sweater, a small watering can in her hand, completely absorbed in what she was doing. The evening light was coming in at a low angle, all gold and amber, and it caught the loose strands of hair around her face and turned them warm. I stood in the doorway for a while without saying anything, watching her. Everything that had come before, the cruelty, the manipulation, the ugliness that had pressed so hard against both of us for so long, felt very far away in that moment. Like something that had happened in a different city, in a different life. She heard me eventually and turned around. "You are back." "Yeah." I slipped my shoes off. "What do you want for dinner?" "Whatever you feel like." She stood up and came inside, and I noticed as always the small, clean scent of the flowering plants on her hands. I pulled her into my arms without warning, and she went still for a second. "What are you doing?" "Recharging," I said. She made a short sound that was almost a laugh and wrapped her arms around me. "Kale." "Yeah. Thank you." Her voice was quiet. "Thank you for not telling me to endure it. Thank you for not being one more person asking me to let things go and stay calm and consider their feelings. And thank you for making me understand that I am not some character written to suffer quietly until everyone finally decides to be sorry." She looked up at me. "I can win," she said. And it was not a question. It was not bravado. It was simply a fact she had finally come to own. "You are not just going to win," I told her. "You are going to win in a way that makes it impossible for any of them to forget." She smiled, and the warmth of it was better than anything else I can describe. Outside, the evening sky had gone deep orange and rose along the western edge, the light pouring through the window and pooling across the floor, and somewhere in the apartment a small breeze had come in from the balcony and was moving through the flower stems with a sound like quiet breathing. I lowered my head and pressed my lips against her forehead. And in that moment, I looked up out of habit, searching the air above her head for those blood-red words that had been following her for months. They were gone. Completely. The air was clear and empty and entirely her own. As though whatever mechanism had been generating them, whatever story had decided her life was a tragedy in progress, had finally, grudgingly acknowledged one simple truth. It could not control her anymore. Because truly powerful people are not the ones who cry beautifully, or survive on sympathy, or know how to play helpless in all the right moments. They are the ones who think clearly when everything hurts. They are the ones who fight back when they are struck. They are the ones who refuse to carry the weight of other people's guilt by pretending the damage never happened. And above everything else, they are the people who have someone standing beside them who means it when they say, "You do not have to be endlessly understanding. You do not have to keep yielding. You do not have to absorb someone else's cruelty just to spare them the consequences of it. Whoever hurts you answers for it. Whatever is owed to you comes back, one way or another." That is what a real story looks like. And we had taken the one written for us, with its predetermined suffering and its cliched redemption and its insistence that the strongest thing a wronged woman could do was forgive gracefully, and we had torn every page of it apart. From that day forward, Lyra was not the real heiress. She was not a tragic figure in someone else's cautionary tale. She was not a role in a story designed to eventually humble her. She was simply Lyra. The person I would walk through any version of this world beside, without hesitation or reservation. And we were going to eat well, sleep soundly, laugh often, and live so thoroughly and so well that every person who had ever wished for our ruin would spend the rest of their days wondering how they miscalculated so completely.